Sean Diddy Combs has just filed a brand new bid to get out of jail before his sentencing in a few months. From arguing he shouldn't be locked up for his swinger lifestyle, to highlighting the atrocious conditions at the MDC, to addressing allegations of violence, he is fighting for his life in this new letter to the judge.
The situation inside Diddy's prison cell has gone from bad to absolutely terrifying. Reports coming out say the music mogul has been violently attacked, and the details are brutal. What was once just a rumor about tension behind bars has now turned into a full-blown nightmare.
Will Sean Diddy Combs be released from jail? I know I've asked that question before so many different times here on Sidebar, but we have right now a brand new request from his legal team, a brand new filing from his defense team arguing for why he should be released now after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago. The circumstances have changed. And I will tell you what, we did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. Think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially, but he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations. That's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard. And they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show 2 conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard, by the way. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this.
And for Diddy, it's life or death. Sources say he's been left severely injured, barely able to move, and is now fighting to survive in a place where mercy doesn't exist. This attack wasn't random, it was personal. From the very start of his sentence, Diddy's presence behind bars stirred chaos. Other inmates didn't respect him, the guards didn't trust him, and there was constant talk that someone was going to make a move. But no one expected it to happen this soon or this violently. According to insiders, It all went down late at night when most of the prison was supposed to be quiet. Diddy was returning to his cell after a brief medical check when a group of inmates reportedly cornered him. It happened fast, no warning, no chance to react. Within seconds, fists were flying, shouts echoed through the corridor, and before guards could even reach the scene, Diddy was already on the ground, bleeding. Witnesses say it wasn't just a beating, it was a message. The attackers knew exactly what they were doing. One of them allegedly whispered something before walking away. Something that made it clear Diddy's reputation on the outside means nothing in there. Whatever power he thought he had, it's gone.
Quote, missed Paul. When asked why she said that, she responded, because I did. This was a lifestyle, one that both Miss Ventura and Jane chose. One they all, as grown adults, had a right to choose. Like many aspects of sex and intimacy, it was not without its complications, its bouts of jealousy, and at times, its frustrations. But that is a hallmark of any serious romantic relationship, and that is what these were, serious, long-term romantic relationships. By the way, not surprising they're really focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, two of the three locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled.
When the guards finally pulled him out, sources say the scene was disturbing. Diddy could barely stand. His face was swollen, his ribs were bruised, and blood stained his shirt. Medical staff rushed him to the infirmary, and though officials haven't released full details, insiders claim his injuries are serious. They're calling this one of the worst assaults the prison has seen in months. The big question now is, who ordered it? Because this wasn't some random fight. It wasn't about a stolen meal or a bad look. It was targeted, and there's speculation that people both inside and outside the prison wanted this to happen. Some say it's payback, for the enemies he made, for the arrogance he carried, for the secrets he tried to keep buried. Others say it's about control, that someone powerful inside wanted to send a message that Diddy's not above the rules. Either way, the attack has left him shaken to the core. Insiders say he's terrified. He's stopped eating, barely sleeps, and keeps asking for 24-hour protection. He's realized what everyone in there already knows: once you're marked in prison, you're
Coupled it with racketeering, and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern-day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, "Moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing." And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, "dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility." These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency suite that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was
never safe again. Guards have reportedly moved him to isolation, but that's not much comfort. Sources close to his legal team say he's been begging to be transferred, claiming he won't survive another week if he stays there. His lawyers are already filing emergency motions, arguing that the prison failed to protect him and that his life is in imminent danger. They're demanding he be moved to a safer federal facility. or even temporarily released for his own safety. But here's the thing, nobody's sure the system is going to help him. For years, Diddy moved through life untouched, untouchable. He always found a way out, always had a backup plan. But in prison, that power means nothing. The guards don't care who he was, and the inmates definitely don't care. To them, he's just another target. The attack has also sparked a massive reaction outside. Social media is in chaos. Fans are split, some are horrified, saying no one deserves to be treated like this, no matter what they've done. Others say it's karma, that after everything Diddy's been accused of
and fall apart is the lens that they would then make their verdict. Why I say that is because if you think a person who's battered, someone who's been a victim, someone who's been assaulted in the ways that were described, most people have an idea as to how they will respond and act towards that, or their expectation if it happened to their loved one, how they'd expect their loved one to act. And in those situations, you don't expect someone to be tweeting, you don't expect somebody to be sending texts telling their abuser that they love them or that they want more of what took place. However, there are other people who see it from maybe more so the lens of a victim or someone who's been abused, who would say, you know what, that's not so beyond the pale of reason, because the abuse has been so entrenched in this person's mind that they then fall in love with their abuser. And so that's not something that they would, look askance upon or look down upon. So, one of the things about being in trial that I always remind my clients, is that despite all the rules that the judge gives people, no one leaves their life experience or their opinions at the courthouse door. It all makes its way into the courtroom and ultimately into the jury room. And that's why you can see such people who are on one side, like celebrating Diddy being acquitted on the much more serious charges, and other people who are like, how did this happen? I am upset. I feel like victims did not get justice today.
Right, exactly. And emotions did run really high, especially when the verdict came down, because I think I myself was pretty surprised at some of the jury's decisions in relation to some of the charges where they found him not guilty. But, obviously they made their decision. They listened to the evidence. They saw all the exhibits, and they made the decision that they did. And say come sentencing that Sean Combs is sentenced to maybe a couple years behind bars in prison. But do you think even after this trial, after everything that we've learned, after the many civil lawsuits that were also filed, do you think that there's any type of way that Sean Combs can have a comeback at this point?
Well, I think there's certainly a comeback that could be crafted and created, in which we as the public may see. Listen, this is a person who has lived his life in the public light, in the limelight, for decades, okay? And so, as has been said before, fame is one of the more addictive or most addictive drugs known to man. And so he was a very famous, and now some might say infamous person. The idea that he allows the narrative to end with the way in which the evidence came in and this kind of mixed bag verdict is not what's the word I'm looking for? If I don't see Diddy allowing the last chapter of his book to be written with this trial, instead, the person that he's held himself out to be and who we now understand him to be is someone who is going to say, look, this was a dark chapter in my life, but now I'm going to show you the phoenix rising from the ashes. And there are other chapters. And I think that he will make an even more concerted effort to be more philanthropic, to be more of a victim's advocate. And also, once he completes these programs, he can say, look, I was once an abuser of women, abuser of drugs, abuser of fame, abuser of power and fortune, but look who I am now. And so I think that's a pretty powerful story. And frankly, people love comeback stories.
This is just the universe evening things out. The comments are ruthless, and the public's empathy seems to be fading fast. Meanwhile, the industry's gone quiet. The people who once called him a legend are silent. The friends who used to party with him every weekend, nowhere to be found. No one wants to be connected to this mess, not while the details of the attack are still unfolding and the world is waiting to see if Diddy even makes it out of this alive. Inside that cell, though, all the fame, all the luxury, all the ego, it means nothing now. He's trapped in a world where survival depends on fear, alliances, and luck. And after this attack, it's clear he has none of those left. Every day he wakes up not knowing if it'll be his last. Every sound, every step outside his cell could mean another attack, another attempt to finish what the first one started. His legal team is trying to paint the situation as desperate. They're saying his injuries are far worse than what the prison is admitting publicly. One lawyer even claimed that Diddy hasn't fully regained
Yeah, they do love a good comeback story, but I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that this is all just for maybe a showmanship, or do you think it's all for PR so that way, Diddy can walk out of MDC Brooklyn or possibly a potential prison and just be like, you know what, I am a changed person. But also in that same breath, what kind of message do you think that sends to victims out there who may have been abused, or something had happened to them by a high profile figure? They want to report this to police. They want to either go to maybe a civil lawyer, all of that stuff. But then after this trial, they are like, no, I can't do that. Look what happened in this case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, there are definitely people who are victims advocates and victims themselves who think that this trial serves to kind of throw cold water, if you will, and chill victims who might want to come forward to express what happened to them, to initiate a criminal case, to initiate a civil case. They look at this case and say, at what cost is it to me personally to have to bare my soul, to only then be grilled on cross-examination, to have all of my intimate details bantied about, in the media, and then to be judged, and then go through all of that, and I walk away in some ways empty-handed. Now, that's certainly one way of looking at things, and there's a lot of credibility as it relates to understanding how someone could feel that way. The flip side, because remember, the scales of justice isn't just one side, there's two sides. The other side, if you will, is at what point in time does a person pay in full their price to society? And then once they've paid the price for their transgressions, at what point do you then look at that person and feel like, hey, you could be a changed person. You can redeem yourself. There's things that you can do to essentially prove to us as members of the public, as clients, as customers, that, you're a changed man. And so that's the hill Diddy has to climb. Whether he climbs that hill or not remains to be seen. But it's definitely a hill that's in front of him. And some might say it's not a hill, it's a mountain.
It is a mountain for Diddy. I think it might honestly be Mount Everest. It's a large mountain for him to scale, for I think people to possibly forget in their conscious what we learned in this trial. And I remember when Sean Combs, we've been covering this since Cassie's lawsuit, since 2023, November of that year. And I just remember thinking that there would be some type of reckoning within the hip hop community, the Black community, as far as Me Too goes, something kind of similar. And I thought, possibly, and I think maybe other people thought so too, that maybe Sean Combs was kind of that person that would, bring about this kind of reckoning in the hip hop community as far as Me Too goes. But do you think that can still happen? Do you think that will still happen?
Well, I think that Diddy's trial, served as a clarion call, a wake-up call, canary in the mine, so to speak, as it relates to, you could be as powerful, as popular, as wealthy as Diddy. I mean, keep in mind, he called himself Brother Love. He got the key to New York City in the months or the year leading up to all of this, right?
Yeah.
And he was sitting on what some might say is the highest pedestal. And look how far he has fallen. Mm-hmm. Now, at the same time, you have that going on. And so people can look, if you really look at the case, and not just the legal case, but the case in the court of public opinion. And victims, if you will, won, because he had
consciousness since the attack, that he's been drifting in and out, hooked up to machines in the infirmary. Prison officials are denying it, but the truth is being buried under red tape and silence. Sources close to the prison say this wasn't some random fight or argument gone wrong. This was calculated, organized, and meant to send a message. Ever since Diddy's sentence began, there's been a target on his back. Inmates don't see a superstar. They see a man who lived above the rules, a man with money, influence, and a past clouded by scandal, and in a place where power comes from fear. Diddy has none left to use. The attack reportedly took place late one night during the usual lockdown hours. Diddy was being escorted back to his cell when a group of inmates cornered him in one of the darker corridors. It happened fast, no time to call for help, no guards in sight. Within seconds, chaos erupted, punches were thrown, kicks landed, and by the time the guards finally arrived, it was already too late. Diddy was on the floor, bleeding, barely conscious.
So in federal court, this is actually very interesting. They rely very heavily on those pre-sentencing investigations. So essentially, what will happen is there'll be a federal probation officer, and they do these for almost every case, where they will do their own investigation, where they'll talk to family members, they'll talk to employers, they'll talk to neighbors, and they will make a recommendation to the court as to suitability for release, suitability for time. And that's something that federal judges traditionally really adhere to. They tend to put a lot of weight on those, far more than they do in state court. The probation department can make a recommendation, but the DA will certainly have more ability, most of the time, to talk a judge in or out of a sentencing recommendation from the probation department. Federal court is different. They really put a lot of weight on those. So that's something that I think is going to be very interesting. And a lot of that will come down to what the individuals involved in that investigation, even though it shouldn't impact their professional recommendation. It's really, I think we're going to see what they thought of the case. Did they think he got away with something horrific here? Did they think that he was getting railroaded from the beginning? I think that may reflect in the recommendation to the court. But of course, we don't know what that is yet. I don't know. If I'm his defense lawyer, I'm kind of I don't know if I am pressing the gas on that, trying to make this thing go faster. I mean, it's coming up. It's coming up soon enough anyway. I would want to give them the time and not press them, because you don't want a probation officer or anybody in the federal system to feel like they're being rushed.
Right.
Because I think it's very easy to just go, okay,
Yeah.
screw it, the guy should stay in.
The prosecution made the
those
point
guys just
yesterday.
made-
They said the point, like, we're not ready to give a really sentencing recommendation. We haven't gotten the report. There's people say, well, maybe he'll get time served, right? He's been locked up. There's other people say, no, the judge is going to throw the book at him. Even though the judge said yesterday, even though I'm denying him bail and I'm looking at certain conditions, this is not reflective or a preview of what my sentencing recommendation or what my sentence will be. But, are we looking at double digits? Are we looking, you think, at 1 to 5 years, time served? I know it's so impossible to ask, but it is a very specific charges he was convicted of.
Yeah, we're not looking at double digits.
Okay.
I cannot imagine the court imposing that. And remember, because this law is so old, and we're in an age of Uber. So literally, somebody in New York City, a man or a woman who engages the services of a sex worker who lives in New Jersey, and if they pay for their Uber, that technically is a Mann Act violation. Okay, so it's a morality crime, and that it just does not carry the same weight.
Will the judge say, hey, listen, multiple instances he was doing it, not one Uber, he was doing it multiple times. You have 2 alleged victims here, Cassie, Jane, and violence, right? He used violence as one of the reasons to deny him bail. I wonder if he's going to look at, even though he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, different characteristics and components of his relationships with Jane and Cassie, and say, this is aggravated.
It's a very interesting question. Can the court aggravate nonviolent offenses that he was convicted of, which are the Mann Act violations? Can he aggravate those when he was acquitted of the more serious charges, essentially acquitted of everything that involved violence, threats, all of that sort of thing? So It's a very, very interesting legal question.
Real quick, asset forfeiture. What is that exactly? How would it work with Mann Act convictions?
I just don't see the feds having it being on very strong ground to
Conscious. Insiders say his injuries are severe: multiple bruises, fractured ribs, deep cuts on his face and arms. He was rushed to the prison infirmary under emergency conditions, and some reports even claim he had to be transferred to an outside medical facility for treatment. Whatever the official statement says, it's clear this wasn't just a fight, it was an attack meant to break him physically and mentally. And now, Diddy's reality has hit rock bottom. Gone are the days of private jets, million-dollar parties, and entourages that followed his every move. Now, he's surrounded by concrete walls, steel bars, and people who couldn't care less who he used to be. The same confidence he carried on stage, the same swagger that defined his career, is gone. In its place is fear, pure, raw fear. The other inmates have reportedly been whispering about him for weeks. Some say they resent his arrogance. Others claim he was trying to buy protection from the wrong people. Whatever the truth is, the outcome is the same. Diddy's no longer safe. Even with guards watching, even in isolation, the threat never really disappears. And that's what makes this story even darker, because no one knows how bad it really is. No one outside those walls knows the full extent of what's happening to him. All we have are fragments, whispers from inside, leaked reports, and the sound of a man's world falling apart. For Diddy, this isn't a scandal anymore, it's survival. The reality of prison life has hit him in the most brutal way possible. And now, he's just another name on the list of broken men who thought they could control the system. But inside those walls, the system always wins. Whether you believe he deserves it or not, one thing is undeniable: Diddy's prison nightmare has become real. He's not living in luxury anymore. He's not surrounded by yes men or bodyguards. He's living minute by minute, fighting just to stay alive. And as the violence inside continues to build, even his legal team is starting to admit what he's too afraid to say out loud, that he might not make it out alive. What happens next will determine everything: his future, his safety, and maybe even his legacy. Because this attack isn't just another headline, it's the moment where all the fame, all the arrogance, all the power finally met its breaking point. And for the first time in his life, Diddy's not the one in control, he's the one begging to survive.